When Captain Lyra Chen stepped onto the bridge of the Valiant Accord holding a leather-bound book instead of a weapon, the Krevathi War Council erupted in chittering laughter. She smiled, opened to a marked page, and began to read. 3 sentences later, their entire fleet went dark. The war had been grinding on for 2 years, and Captain Lyra Chen had learned to measure time in coffee cups rather than calendar dates. She sat in the mess hall of the Valiant Accord, Earth's flagship in the Outer Rim Defense Fleet, turning the pages of a book so old its spine creaked. Around her, Marines and engineers clattered trays and traded jokes, their voices a low hum of exhaustion and forced cheer. Lyra traced her finger over a passage in The Art of War, a text her grandmother had pressed into her hands the day she enlisted. "Strategy isn't about strength," her grandmother had said. "It's about knowing what your enemy can't see." Lyra had carried the book through every deployment, every skirmish, every narrow escape. The other officers teased her for it, some gently, some not. Lieutenant Kowalski had once asked if she planned to bore the Krevathi to death. She'd only smiled and kept reading. The Krevathi were a reptilian species with scales like polished obsidian and eyes that glowed a faint amber. They'd invaded human space without warning, targeting colony worlds with brutal efficiency. Their ships were faster, their weapons more precise, and their commanders coldly pragmatic. Earth's forces had been on the defensive ever since, scrambling to hold the line at places like Titan Station and the Helix Nebula. Lyra had fought in both battles, watching good people die while the Krevathi advanced with mechanical certainty. She closed the book and looked up as Commander Osai entered the mess hall, his jaw tight. "Chen, briefing room, now." His tone left no room for questions. Lyra tucked the book under her arm and followed him through the narrow corridors, past blast doors still scarred from the last Krevathi raid. The Valiant Accord was a battleship, not a library, and its interior reflected that reality: bare steel, flickering overhead lights, the faint smell of recycled air and burnt circuitry. Osai led her into a small briefing room where Admiral Zhang stood waiting, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Behind her, a holographic star map glowed, showing the Krevathi fleet massed near the Vega system. "Captain Chen," Admiral Zhang said, her voice clipped, "we've intercepted Krevathi communications. They're planning a major offensive in 72 hours. We need every officer's input on how to counter it." Lyra nodded, setting her book on the table. Osai glanced at it and sighed. "With all respect, Captain, we're not in a philosophy class." Lyra met his eyes. "Strategy is philosophy, Commander. Sun Tzu understood that 2,500 years ago." Admiral Zhang waved a hand. "Let her speak, we're out of conventional options." Lyra stepped closer to the hologram, studying the Krevathi formations. Their ships clustered in tight geometric patterns optimized for coordinated strikes. It was textbook military doctrine, overwhelming force applied with precision, but textbooks had weaknesses. "They're too rigid," Lyra said. "Look at the spacing. They rely on synchronized commands. If we disrupt their communication network, even for a moment, they'll hesitate, and hesitation in battle is death." Osai crossed his arms. "Easier said than done. Their encryption is 10 layers deep. Our hackers have been trying to crack it for months." Lyra tapped the book's cover. "We don't need to crack it, we need to make them crack themselves." Admiral Zhang's expression sharpened. "Explain." Lyra opened the book to a dog-eared page and read aloud. "All warfare is based on deception. When capable, feign incapacity. When active, feign inactivity." She looked up. "The Krevathi think they know us. They think we're desperate, reactive. What if we gave them what they expect and buried a trap inside it?" The room fell silent. Osai leaned forward, his skepticism softening into curiosity. "What kind of trap?" Lyra smiled. "One they won't see coming." That night, Lyra sat alone in her quarters, the book open on her lap. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, steady and sure. "Words have power, Lyra. The right ones at the right time can change everything." She traced the margin notes her grandmother had written, observations, questions, connections to battles fought centuries ago. The book wasn't just history. It was a conversation across time, a reminder that human ingenuity had always found a way. Lyra closed her eyes and let herself believe it again. The next morning, the Valiant Accord received new orders: prepare for a high-risk diplomatic mission. Lyra read the briefing twice, her pulse quickening. Earth Command wanted to negotiate a ceasefire, a desperate gambit that no one believed would work, but it was also an opportunity. The Krevathi had agreed to a single meeting aboard a neutral station, a derelict facility orbiting a dead moon. Admiral Zhang would lead the delegation, and she'd chosen Lyra as her tactical advisor. Osai pulled Lyra aside as the crew prepped the shuttle. "You really think you can outsmart them with old proverbs?" Lyra adjusted her uniform and picked up her book. "I think underestimating an enemy is the fastest way to lose, and right now they're underestimating us." The shuttle ride to the neutral station was tense and quiet. Lyra sat beside Admiral Zhang, the book resting on her knees. Across from her, Lieutenant Reyes checked his sidearm, his jaw set. No one expected the Krevathi to honor the ceasefire. This was reconnaissance disguised as diplomacy, a chance to see their enemy up close and learn how they thought. The station loomed ahead, a skeletal structure of rusted metal and shattered viewports. It had once been a mining hub, abandoned after the ore ran dry. Now it was a ghost, drifting in silence. The shuttle docked with a metallic clang, and the team disembarked into a dimly lit corridor. Lyra's breath misted in the cold air. Somewhere deeper in the station, the Krevathi were waiting. Admiral Zhang led the way, her steps echoing on the grated floor. They reached a central chamber where a long table had been set up, improvised from scavenged panels. On the far side stood 3 Krevathi officers, their scales gleaming under the harsh emergency lighting. The tallest one, Commander Velrax, inclined his head in a gesture that might have been respect or mockery. "Humans," he said, his voice a low rasp, "you honor us with your presence. Or perhaps you simply ran out of places to hide." Admiral Zhang didn't flinch. "We're here to discuss terms." Velrax's amber eyes flicked to Lyra, then to the book in her hands. "And you bring literature, how quaint." Lyra met his gaze without blinking. "Knowledge is never quaint, Commander, it's eternal." Velrax chittered, a sound halfway between laughter and a hiss. "You think words will save you? We have studied your species. You are emotional, disorganized, weak. You cling to the past because you have no future." Lyra opened the book slowly, her fingers steady. "Funny, that's exactly what the Mongols thought about the Chinese, and the Romans about the Goths, and the British about the colonists. History has a way of humbling the overconfident." The other Krevathi exchanged glances, their scales shifting in subtle patterns. Velrax leaned forward, his claws tapping the table. "Then read us your wisdom, Captain. Let us hear what your ancient texts say about hopeless wars." Lyra found the page she wanted and began to read. "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting, appear weak when you are strong and strong when you are weak." She closed the book and looked up. "You've won every battle so far, Commander. But have you asked yourself why we keep showing up?" The chamber fell silent, the air thick with tension. Velrax's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Lyra saw something flicker beneath his confidence, doubt, and that was when everything changed. Commander Velrax straightened, his claws clicking against the table in a sharp rhythm. "You waste our time with riddles," he said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. Lyra tucked the book under her arm and stepped closer. "No riddle, a fact. You've assumed we're desperate, that we'll throw everything we have at you in one last suicidal charge. You've positioned your fleet accordingly, tight formations, synchronized strikes, overwhelming force. It's textbook. It's also predictable." Admiral Zhang remained still, letting Lyra lead. The Krevathi officers shifted, their scales rippling in patterns Lyra had learned meant agitation. Velrax hissed softly, "You know nothing of our plans." Lyra smiled. "I know you're listening to this conversation on an encrypted channel. I know your command ship is monitoring every word. And I know that in about 30 seconds, you're going to realize you've made a terrible mistake." Velrax lunged forward, but before he could speak, the lights in the chamber flickered, then died. Emergency red lighting kicked in, casting the room in a hellish glow. The Krevathi's comm devices crackled with static, and Velrax froze, his hand going to his earpiece. Lyra's voice remained calm. "Your fleet just lost synchronization. The signal you've been using to coordinate movements, the one you thought was unbreakable, just got flooded with your own tactical data, looped and amplified. Right now, your captains are receiving contradictory orders. Half think they're supposed to advance, half think they're supposed to retreat, and none of them can verify which is real." Velrax's eyes blazed. "Impossible, our encryption isn't encryption," Lyra interrupted. "It's a protocol, and protocols have patterns. We didn't break your code, Commander, we learned your language, and then we taught it to lie." The chamber erupted as the Krevathi officers shouted into their comms, trying to restore order. Admiral Zheng finally moved, her voice cutting through the chaos. This meeting is over. Your fleet is in disarray. Withdraw now, or we press the advantage. Velrak spun toward her, his teeth bared. You call this honor? Lyra met his gaze. I call it survival. You wanted to see us weak. We showed you weakness, and you walked right into it. The Krevathi retreated, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. The human delegation returned to the shuttle, and as they lifted off, Lyra watched the Krevathi ships on the scanner, breaking formation, colliding, scattering like startled birds. Back on the Valiant Accord, the bridge erupted in controlled celebration. Officers clapped each other on the back, their relief palpable. Commander Osai approached Lyra, his expression equal parts amazement and disbelief. How did you know it would work? Lyra held up the book. Sun Tzu said the best victories are the ones where you never have to fight. We didn't destroy their fleet, we made them destroy their own cohesion. Osai shook his head, a slow grin spreading across his face. You really read their doom aloud. Lyra's smile faded slightly. Only the first chapter. This war isn't over. She was right. Over the next week, the Krevathi regrouped, their commanders furious and humiliated. They launched smaller, more vicious raids, hit-and-run attacks designed to demoralize rather than conquer. Lyra studied their new patterns, her book always nearby. She noticed something the others didn't. The Krevathi weren't just angry, they were afraid. Fear made them sloppy. They abandoned their rigid formations and started improvising, which meant they were making mistakes. Lyra began cataloging those mistakes, cross-referencing them with historical battles where overconfidence had turned into desperation. She saw echoes of Napoleon's retreat from Moscow, of Hannibal's slow unraveling after Cana. The Krevathi were following a script they didn't even know existed. One evening, Admiral Zheng summoned Lyra to her office. The admiral poured 2 cups of coffee, real coffee, a luxury in wartime, and gestured for Lyra to sit. You've become something of a legend, Zheng said. The Marines are calling you the Oracle. They think you can see the future. Lyra sipped her coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. I can't see the future, Admiral. I can see the past, and the past repeats itself more often than people realize. Zheng studied her for a long moment. The Krevathi have requested another meeting. This time they want you present, specifically you. Lyra set down her cup. Why? They want to understand how you did it, or maybe they want revenge. Either way, it's a risk. Lyra thought of her grandmother, of the way she'd pressed the book into her hands with trembling fingers. Strategy isn't about strength, she'd said. It's about knowing what your enemy can't see. Lyra picked up her book. I'll go. Admiral Zheng nodded slowly. I thought you'd say that. But Lyra, be careful. You've humiliated them once. They won't give you a second chance. Lyra stood, tucking the book under her arm. Good, I won't need one. The second meeting took place on a different neutral station, this one closer to Krevathi space. The atmosphere was colder, sharper, as if the very air held a grudge. Lyra arrived with a smaller escort, just Lieutenant Reyes and a communications officer. The Krevathi were already waiting, but this time the delegation was led by a different officer, General Corvan, a scarred veteran whose reputation preceded him. He was known for brutality and cunning in equal measure. Corvan's eyes locked onto Lyra the moment she entered. The human who reads, he said, his voice like grinding stone. I have heard much about you. Lyra inclined her head. And I've heard much about you, General. Your tactics at the Battle of Proxima were efficient. Corvan's scales rippled, a Krevathi sign of pleasure. You study us. I study everyone, Lyra said. It's the only way to survive. Corvan gestured to the table. Sit, let us speak plainly. You disrupted our fleet. You embarrassed Commander Velrax, but you did not win the war. We are still here. We are still strong. Lyra sat, placing her book on the table between them. Strength isn't the same as victory, General. You can be strong and still lose. History is full of strong empires that fell because they couldn't adapt. Corvan leaned forward. And what does your book say about empires that refuse to fall? Lyra opened the book to a marked page. It says they always fall anyway. It's just a matter of time. The general's claws tapped the table, a slow, deliberate rhythm. You are bold, Captain, but boldness without power is arrogance. Lyra met his gaze, and power without wisdom is ruin. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Corvan did something unexpected. He laughed, a low, rumbling sound that echoed in the chamber. You are not what I expected, Captain Chen. You do not rage or plead. You simply observe. Lyra closed the book. Rage and pleading don't win wars, General. Understanding does. Corvan stood, his towering frame casting a long shadow. Then let us test your understanding. I propose a challenge. A single engagement, your fleet against mine in 3 days. If you win, we withdraw from this sector. If we win, you surrender your command. Lyra's pulse quickened, but her voice remained steady. And if I refuse, Corvan's eyes gleamed, then we continue as we have been, grinding you down colony by colony until there is nothing left. Lyra stood, picking up her book. I accept. The shuttle ride back to the Valiant Accord was silent. Lieutenant Reyes finally broke it, his voice tight. Captain, you just bet the entire sector on a single battle. Lyra stared out the viewport at the distant stars. No, I bet on us, there's a difference. Reyes shook his head, but he didn't argue. Back on the ship, Lyra convened the senior officers and laid out the challenge. The room erupted in protests, concerns, and contingency plans. Admiral Zhang silenced them with a raised hand. Captain Chen has earned our trust. If she says we can win, then we prepare to win. Now, how do we do it? Lyra opened her book and began to read. The Valiant Accord buzzed with frantic energy as crew members prepped weapons, ran diagnostics, and triple-checked every system. Lyra stood in the war room, surrounded by holographic projections of the battlefield, a stretch of open space near the asteroid belt where the engagement would take place. Commander Osai leaned over the table, his brow furrowed. The Krevathi will outnumber us 3-1. Even with perfect tactics, the odds are brutal. Lyra traced a finger along the projected asteroid field. Then we don't fight a perfect battle, we fight a messy one. Admiral Zhang raised an eyebrow. Elaborate. Lyra zoomed in on a cluster of asteroids, their irregular shapes tumbling slowly through the void. The Krevathi rely on formation integrity. They need open space to coordinate. What if we don't give it to them? Osai's eyes widened. You want to fight in the asteroid field? Not in it, Lyra corrected. Around it, we use the asteroids as cover and obstacles, force them to break formation just to engage us. Once they're scattered, they lose their greatest advantage, synchronization. Lieutenant Kowalski, the ship's tactical officer, whistled low. It's risky. One wrong move and we're debris. Lyra met his gaze. So is doing nothing. At least this way, we control the chaos. Admiral Zhang studied the projection for a long moment, then nodded. Make it happen. And Captain Chen, what does your book say about fighting in confined spaces? Lyra opened to a passage and read, in difficult ground, press on. In encircled ground, devise stratagems. In death ground, fight. She closed the book. We're not in death ground yet, but we're close, so we press on and we devise. The officers dispersed, each to their stations. Lyra remained behind, staring at the hologram. She could see the battle in her mind, the Krevathi ships advancing in tight ranks, confident and coordinated, and then the first collision, the first moment of confusion. She just had to make sure that moment came at the right time. The next 2 days were a blur of simulations, contingency plans, and coffee that tasted like engine oil. Lyra barely slept, her dreams filled with swirling ships and ancient battles fought with swords and shields instead of lasers and missiles. On the second night, she sat alone in the observation deck, the book open on her lap. Outside, the stars wheeled slowly, indifferent to the human struggle unfolding beneath them. She thought of her grandmother, of the stories she'd told about wars fought long before Lyra was born. Every conflict is the same, her grandmother had said. People fighting for something they believe in, making the same mistakes over and over. The only thing that changes is the scale. The door hissed open, and Admiral Zhang stepped inside. She didn't speak, just sat beside Lyra and gazed out at the stars. After a long silence, Zhang said, You know, when I was your age, I thought strategy was about being smarter than the enemy. Took me 20 years to realize it's about being braver than yourself. Lyra glanced at her. Meaning? Zhang smiled faintly. Meaning you're about to risk everything on a hunch. That takes courage. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Lyra nodded, the weight of the moment settling over her like a cloak. Do you think we'll win? Zhang's smile faded. I think you'll give us a chance. That's more than we had yesterday. The day of the battle arrived cold and quiet. Lyra stood on the bridge, the book tucked into her jacket pocket. Around her, the crew moved with practiced efficiency, their faces set in grim determination. The Krevathi fleet appeared on the long-range scanners, 37 ships arranged in perfect geometric formation, their hulls gleaming like polished obsidian. Commander Osai's voice was steady over the comms. "All ships report ready, Captain, waiting on your mark." Lyra took a breath and opened a channel to the entire fleet. "This is Captain Chen. In a few minutes, we're going to do something the Krevathi don't expect. We're going to fight ugly. We're going to use every dirty trick, every improvisation, every ounce of chaos we can muster. They think they know us. They think we're predictable. Let's prove them wrong." She paused, then added, "And remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every colony, every family, every person who's counting on us to hold the line. So let's make this count." The channel closed, and Lyra turned to Admiral Zhang. "Give the order." Zhang nodded. "All ships, advance." The Valiant Accord surged forward, its engines flaring blue-white. Behind it, the rest of the human fleet followed, a ragtag assembly of battleships, frigates, and retrofitted cargo haulers armed to the teeth. They plunged toward the asteroid field, and the Krevathi fleet moved to intercept. The first shots rang out as the fleets closed, brilliant lances of energy that lit up the void. The Krevathi fired in perfect volleys, their targeting systems synchronized to the millisecond. But the human ships didn't return fire immediately. Instead, they scattered, weaving between the asteroids with reckless speed. Lyra watched the tactical display, her heart pounding. "Now," she said. The Valiant Accord fired a spread of missiles, not at the Krevathi ships, but at the asteroids themselves. The explosions shattered the rocks into clouds of debris, obscuring the battlefield in a chaotic fog. The Krevathi formation hesitated, their sensors momentarily blinded. That hesitation was all Lyra needed. Flanking squadrons engage. 2 wings of human fighters burst from behind the larger asteroids, hammering the Krevathi's exposed flanks. The enemy ships tried to regroup, but the debris field made coordinated movement impossible. Ships collided, alarms blared, and the perfect formation began to fracture. Lyra's voice was calm as she directed the battle, calling out targets and adjustments with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. She could feel the rhythm of the engagement, the ebb and flow of momentum. The Krevathi were strong, but they were also rigid, and rigidity was a weakness. General Corven's voice crackled over the open channel, his tone laced with fury. "You fight without honor, Captain Chen." Lyra opened the channel, her voice steady. "I fight to win, General, there's a difference." She closed the channel and turned to Lieutenant Kowalski. "Target their command ship, all weapons." The Valiant Accord aligned its main cannons, and a devastating barrage tore through the void. The Krevathi command ship's shields flared, then buckled, and a secondary explosion ripped through its hull. The ship listed, trailing fire and debris. For a moment the battlefield fell silent. Then the remaining Krevathi ships began to retreat, their formation collapsing entirely. The human fleet didn't pursue. They held their ground, watching as the enemy fled into the dark. On the bridge of the Valiant Accord, the crew erupted in cheers, their relief and joy palpable. Lyra stood still, her hand resting on the book in her pocket. She thought of her grandmother's words, of Sun Tzu's wisdom, of all the battles fought and won by people who refused to give up. Admiral Zhang approached, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "You did it, Captain, against all odds, you did it." Lyra exhaled slowly. "We did it, Admiral, all of us." But even as she spoke, she knew the war wasn't over. It was only beginning, and somewhere in the dark, General Corven was already planning his revenge. The celebration in the mess hall lasted well into the night, but Lyra slipped away early, retreating to her quarters with the book tucked under her arm. She sat on the edge of her bunk, staring at the pages without really reading them. Victory should have felt triumphant, but instead it felt heavy, like a debt she'd borrowed against the future. The Krevathi had retreated, but they hadn't surrendered. General Corven's final transmission before withdrawing had been brief and chilling. "This is not over, Captain Chen. We will meet again." Lyra believed him. The next morning, Admiral Zhang called an emergency briefing. The senior officers assembled in the war room, their faces still bright with the afterglow of victory. But Zhang's expression was grim as she activated the holographic display. "Intelligence has intercepted new communications," she said. "The Krevathi are regrouping near the outer colonies. It looks like they're preparing for a retaliatory strike." Commander Osai's smile faded. "How soon?" 72 hours, maybe less." The room fell silent. Lyra studied the display, noting the Krevathi fleet's positioning. They were closer to human space now, more aggressive. Corvan wasn't retreating, he was repositioning. They're changing tactics, Lyra said. They won't rely on formations this time. They'll hit us in waves, probe for weaknesses, then exploit them. Zheng nodded. Exactly, which means we need a new strategy. Lyra opened her book, flipping through the pages until she found the passage she wanted. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. She looked up. We know their strength, now we need to understand their fear. Osai frowned. Their fear. Lyra tapped the display. Corvan challenged me personally. He's invested now. His reputation, his honor, it's all tied to defeating us. That's his weakness. He's not fighting for conquest anymore. He's fighting for pride. Admiral Zheng leaned forward, so we exploit that. Make him overextend. Lyra nodded. We bait him, offer something he can't resist, a target so valuable he'll commit everything to take it. Lieutenant Kowalski's eyes widened. You're talking about using ourselves as bait. Lyra met his gaze. I'm talking about using me as bait. The room erupted in protests, but Lyra raised a hand. Listen, Corvan wants to prove he's smarter than the human who humiliated him. If we broadcast my location, he'll come, and when he does, we'll be ready. Osai shook his head. It's suicide, Captain. You'll be exposed. Not if we have a contingency, Lyra said. She turned to Admiral Zheng. We set up a decoy convoy, make it look like I'm transferring to a forward outpost. Corvan intercepts it, commits his forces, and then we hit him from behind. Classic pincer maneuver. Zheng studied her for a long moment, and if he sees through the ruse, Lyra's expression hardened. Then I'll have to improvise. The plan was set in motion within hours. A convoy of 3 transports and a single escort frigate departed the Valiant Accord, broadcasting encoded messages that made it clear Captain Chen was aboard. The decoy was convincing, just risky enough to seem legitimate. Lyra, in reality, remained on the flagship, monitoring the operation from the bridge. The Krevathi took the bait faster than expected. Within 18 hours, their scouts located the convoy, and General Corvan's command ship led a strike force to intercept. Lyra watched the tactical display, her pulse steady. They're committing everything, Osai said, his voice tight. 15 ships, that's half their available fleet. Lyra nodded. Good, that means the other half is vulnerable. Signal the flanking squadrons, begin the attack. 2 human battle groups, hidden in the shadow of a nearby moon, roared to life. They struck the Krevathi's rear guard with devastating precision, crippling supply ships and disabling escorts. The Krevathi fleet fractured, caught between the decoy convoy ahead and the surprise assault behind. General Corvan's voice boomed over the comms, raw with fury. Chen, I know you are there. Face me, coward. Lyra opened a channel, her voice calm. I'm right here, General, but you're not. You're chasing shadows while your fleet burns. Corvan roared and his ship turned sharply, engines flaring as he attempted to regroup. But it was too late. The human forces pressed the advantage, hammering the Krevathi ships with coordinated strikes. One by one, the enemy vessels fell or retreated, their coordination shattered. Corvan's command ship took a direct hit to the engines and it began to drift, powerless. Lyra's finger hovered over the firing command. One more shot and Corvan would be finished. She hesitated. Admiral Zheng noticed. Captain? Lyra closed her eyes, thinking of the book, of the passage her grandmother had underlined in red ink. In the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity. Build your opponent a golden bridge to retreat across. She opened her eyes. Cease fire, hail the Krevathi. The bridge fell silent. Zheng's expression was unreadable, but she nodded. Do it. A channel opened and General Corvan's face appeared on the screen, scarred, furious, and exhausted. Have you come to gloat, Captain? Lyra shook her head. No, I've come to offer you a choice. Withdraw now and your fleet survives. Continue and I will finish what I started. Corvan's eyes burned. You think mercy will save you? We will return. We will always return. Lyra's voice softened. Maybe, but not today, and maybe, General, not tomorrow either. Because now you know humans don't fight the way you expect. We adapt, we survive, and we learn. Corvan stared at her for a long moment and something shifted in his expression, respect perhaps, or simply the bitter acknowledgement of defeat. He cut the channel without another word and the Krevathi fleet began to retreat. This time they didn't regroup. They simply fled, scattering into the dark. On the bridge of the Valiant Accord, the crew stood in stunned silence. Then Lieutenant Kowalski let out a whoop and the cheers began again, louder and more exuberant than before. Lyra stepped back, her hand resting on the book in her pocket. She felt no triumph, only exhaustion and a faint, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind them. Admiral Zheng approached, her voice low. "You let him go?" Lyra nodded. "I did." "Why?" Lyra looked out at the stars. "Because wars end, Admiral, not when you destroy your enemy, but when you stop needing to." Zheng studied her, then placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're wiser than your years, Captain Chen." Lyra smiled faintly. "I just have a good book." That night, Lyra returned to her quarters and opened the book to the final page. Her grandmother's handwriting filled the margin. "Remember, Lyra's strategy is not about defeating your enemy. It's about understanding them, and sometimes the greatest victory is the one where no one else has to die." Lyra closed the book and set it on the shelf beside her bunk. Outside, the stars wheeled on, indifferent and eternal, but for now, the war was quiet. And that was enough. 3 months later, the Valiant Accord docked at Earth Station Alpha for resupply and crew rotation. The corridors buzzed with activity as Marines disembarked, engineers hauled equipment, and families reunited with tearful embraces. Lyra stood at the docking bay window, watching the organized chaos below. She held the book in her hands, its cover worn smooth by years of handling. A young ensign approached, her uniform crisp and new. "Captain Chen?" Lyra turned. "Yes." The ensign hesitated, then gestured to the book. "Is it true that you used that to defeat the Krevathi?" Lyra smiled. "I used a lot of things. This just helped me see them clearly." The ensign's eyes shone with admiration. "They're calling you a legend, ma'am. Some of the cadets are even reading The Art of War now." Lyra's smile faded slightly. "Tell them it's not about the book, it's about thinking, about questioning, about not assuming you know everything." The ensign nodded, saluted, and hurried off. Lyra turned back to the window, watching Earth spin slowly below. She thought of her grandmother, of all the battles fought and won by people who refused to quit. The Krevathi had withdrawn, but the peace was fragile. There would be other conflicts, other enemies, other moments where the right words at the right time could change everything. Admiral Zheng joined her at the window. "You're thinking too much, Captain." Lyra chuckled. "Occupational hazard." Zheng handed her a cup of coffee. "Command wants to promote you. They're talking about giving you your own task force." Lyra sipped the coffee, savoring the warmth. "What do you think?" Zheng smiled. "I think you've earned it, but more than that, I think you'll use it well." Lyra nodded slowly. "Then I'll accept, on one condition." "Name it." Lyra held up the book. "I want every officer under my command to read this. Not because it has all the answers, but because it teaches you how to ask the right questions." Zheng's smile widened. "Done." They stood together in companionable silence, watching the Earth turn. Somewhere out in the dark, General Corvan was rebuilding his fleet, planning his next move. But Lyra wasn't afraid. She had the book, her crew, and the knowledge that victory wasn't about strength, it was about understanding. And she understood more than she ever had before. As she turned to leave, she whispered the words her grandmother had taught her so many years ago. "Strategy isn't about strength, it's about knowing what your enemy can't see." And with that, Captain Lyra Chen walked back onto the bridge, ready for whatever came next. The war wasn't over, but neither was she, and sometimes that was the most powerful weapon of all.